Hello, fellow MSPers, and welcome to another episode of It's a Numbers Game with myself, Adam Morris, and my co-host, Daniel Welling. Today, we have a great conversation lined up with Jake Webber-Cadby. Jake is Director of Strategic Sales with Inforcer, and Inforcer is a platform designed specifically to help MSPs enhance their security and efficiency when managing Microsoft policies. Today, you'll learn how MSPs can streamline Microsoft policy management across multiple tenants, saving time and resources, how Enforcer helps MSPs reduce security risks and increase visibility into their clients' environments, how MSPs can create new revenue streams by unlocking the full potential of Microsoft Business Premium licenses for their clients, and of course, much more. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jake Webber-Cadby.
Jake, great to have you with us after a couple of false starts, but you're here with us today. So great to get stuck into what for some will actually be an entirely new topic or subject, and others, of course, will always be ahead of the curve and on the curve. And but Adam and I, maybe we're a little bit behind sometimes. So perhaps you could just kick us off with what exactly is it that Enforcer does?
Yeah, absolutely. And firstly, gents, thanks for having me. And bearing with startup life has got my calendar a little bit hectic at the moment, so I do appreciate it. But yeah, ultimately, Enforcer is a software platform built for MSPs by MSPs, and we are laser focused on helping MSPs manage Microsoft policies across all of their customer tenants. There's been, and there still is, an innate challenge in doing this, where MSPs have to manually configure every single one of their customers' Microsoft tenants one by one. So see Enforcer as a platform that sits on top of all of those tenants and provides a centralized place for that managed service provider to keep those tenants up to a certain security standard.
Okay, super. And probably the place I'm going with to sort of work out where you sit in the market. And in fact, we've had Andrew from MSP Easy Tools on the podcast before. We know of like Octiga, for example, and actually just last week we recorded another episode on CIPP. So how does that position with Enforcer?
Yeah, I think that the first thing I always ask MSPs when they ask me that is, I kind of say, people like Octiga and CIPP, they're not competitors of ours. We work hand in hand together. So there's actually a lot of Enforcer clients who will use tools like CIPP to help with things like user provisioning within Microsoft, or helping apply certain permissions to different users within GDAP, which has been a big push in the MSP space as well. Whereas Enforcer is laser focused just on the policy level on the tenants. Those companies definitely do a bit of policy support as well. So from within CIPP, as an example, you can deploy certain policy types, but really at Enforcer, we are covering pretty much every policy that an MSP would use. So it's really that centralized place for the policy management. And then people would use things like CIPP to help with some of the administrative tasks. Same applies for Octiga as well.
Okay. And from a business case perspective, so like, for example, on the CIPP episode, like we were really quick to establish that this is a time saver and therefore the business case, well, a very low/no cost product anyway. And so, yeah, very easy to get to a business case. So it feels to me like the centralized policy management topic is actually probably something that MSPs should be doing, or their clients think they should or are already doing it, but they're not. Is this a shoring up of perception, or is this like something new that the MSP can go to the client and say, actually, this new thing is now with us, and here's how we're gonna solve that problem for you?
Yeah, I think we align in some respects with that with the CIP piece around time saves, there is a really clear and obvious business case around time savings.
Mhm.
We actually summarize it by the 3 R's is what we call it internally. So resource, risk reduction, and revenue streams. So that is where Enforcer can really help a managed service provider, depending on where they're at in their Microsoft journey. So for us, the business case closely aligns to the maturity of the MSP and how much of the Microsoft technology they're consuming today, and how many of those policies are they configuring one by one for their customers. So highly mature MSPs, people like Infinity Group, who we work with, because they had a whole service wraparound on top of Microsoft, they were spending hours in senior consultant resource manually doing this work. So the business case for them was very clear. A MSP who's really early on the Microsoft journey, and they sold a lot of third-party products to deliver the security services. For them, we're going to speak to them about future-proofing their business and adding additional revenue streams through more value adds on top of Microsoft technology. And then in terms of risk reduction, as you mentioned, Daniel, a lot of MSPs just haven't got the time to put the right policies in place. And then more importantly, track those policies against a certain security level to ensure that their customers aren't deviating away from that. So Enforcer gives them daily visibility into what is changing across all of their customers. So if an engineer is tweaking something, when a call comes into the help desk, that MSP is getting notified of that change. So that risk reduction is a key piece as well, because no users are going to get left out of a MFA policy, as an example.
Mhm. And Jake, you mentioned the revenue stream. So my eyes lit up on that one. So the first two make complete sense. I get that. Just talk a little bit about how MSPs then can exploit this and make it a revenue stream.
Yeah. So if you think about what a lot of MSPs have done over the past couple of years, is a lot of them have tried to take their customers through that journey of the basic Microsoft licensing up to a business premium Microsoft license, which is the license that actually includes a lot of the great technology, such as endpoint security, email security, all of those components. Now, MSPs have shied away from leveraging all of those elements of the license. And what they've ended up doing is just selling a license and applying a bit of margin. Because Enforcer allows them to effectively deliver more services, they can now go to their customers and be like, okay, not only are we taking you up to business premium because it includes X, Y, and Z, we can also unlock the security components of it. So our messaging is, how can we help you as an MSP unlock business premium for your customers? So we've got customers who will provide things like Microsoft Secure Score as a service. Now, Secure Score is a metric that Microsoft are marketing to the whole world, and it's really going to be it's going to be their silver bullet, because that metric is closely aligned to basically how much Microsoft technology do you consume. The higher your Secure Score, the more of that technology you're consuming. So we've got MSPs who are exploiting that and delivering revenue streams on top of that, and then using Enforcer to just help them manage those services in the background.
So if I understand it correctly, to some extent, this is about enabling the efficiency of the margin on those other upsells effectively. Your resources aren't going to be eaten away by managing a whole, ecosystem of complex Microsoft products. We can do that with this solution and, keep those margins secure effectively.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's it. And, if you look at the MSP space at the moment, it can be really hard to differentiate yourself. So really going, and rather than just speaking about a Microsoft license and applying small bits of margin, going to them and talking about how they can take them on a security journey through leveraging things like Microsoft Secure Score is really powerful. Because think about the credibility a name like Microsoft has when you're delivering services to a small business, rather than all these third-party MSP tools that really the end users don't care about because they've never heard about them.
And I think we used to use Secure Score back in the day as an opportunity creator, or try and win some new business off the back of it. Can your tool help us in that process at all?
Yeah, definitely.
Yourself?
So we've got a pre-sales auditing tool available from within Inforcer, where an MSP can essentially do an audit of the prospective client's Microsoft tenant, and we're going to flag certain things that fall out of compliance with things like CIS recommendations. So it will show that end client or prospective client their secure score, how many users have not got MFA enabled, how many global admins have they got, so that the MSP can start highlighting some of the gaps in their security posture, and then talk about the proactive services that they would deliver that perhaps the incumbent isn't delivering at the moment.
Yeah, good. Makes sense.
And for that tool, what would the client need to provide in terms of permissions for that?
So for prospective clients, they would need to be pretty far down the journey, because the MSP would need to access, they would need the global administrator access,
right,
to be able to run that report, because it obviously needs to do a scan of that Microsoft tenant. Now, with that being said, if the MSP is clever about it, they can offer it as a free assessment or risk assessment or audit, whereas a lot of other MSPs are charging that as a service. So when you position it like that, of course, a prospective client's not going to mind giving, the access to see where they're at in their journey. Now, for all paid tenants within Inforcer, so for all of your existing clients, you can just run that report periodically, and then you can sit down, the account management team can show that existing client, here's where you're at 3 months ago. In the last 3 months, we've deployed X, Y, and Z policies. We've increased your secure score from 50 to 75%, and you've shown that continual value to your existing client, as well as using the prospecting element as well.
Okay. Two questions then that follow. The first is interesting to hear the viewpoint on not charging for that initial discovery. And in some ways, I would see perhaps arranging administrator access that the harder challenge than perhaps releasing some money and demonstrating the value of it. For example, well, we don't have the details. Our MSP looks after that. We don't have a global. How do we go about that? So any tips there would be appreciated. And then in terms of the, really like the idea of providing that journey progress. You were here and now you're there, and almost becomes the gamification. So next quarter we're gonna do another 5 points or whatever. But talk us through what's perhaps involved in making that progress, in deploying these policies, and how much knowledge and experience the MSP needs of what they're deploying. Like, is there like a playbook that you provide along with the tool to make it happen? Or do we need to have some really clever Microsoft people still involved in it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I suppose, so back to your first point around the prospective auditing and the rights in it to actually do that. The reality is we are a tool for an MSP to look after their existing clients. So it is more of a nice to have within the platform. So there's no real, I don't have a silver bullet answer in terms of how would they get hold of that GA access. The reality is that's the only way in which the report can be run. But I guess if you do position it as a paid service, and not in addition to the report, you deliver some other things in that pre-sales standpoint, and it's a bit later on in the sales journey, maybe the trust is being developed a little bit more. And then to your second point, that is, I would really say, our unique differentiator in the market is the expertise we bring above and beyond the technology, and the laser focus we have on customer experience. So just tomorrow, we are running a webinar for all of our existing customers to speak to our 365 consultant, who has 10 plus years of experience in just working with Microsoft. And they can come on and they can increase their own internal knowledge. Absolutely, to get the most out of Inforcer, there needs to be a certain level of Microsoft expertise internally. You can't, which let's be honest, the majority of MSPs do have an understanding of Microsoft. So we don't require them to be MVPs or absolute experts in the space, because we can help them get to a certain level as well, just through the exposure we give them. And then on the ongoing security journey, we actually even provide a policy library, which we're constantly building in, where a MSP who, let's say, is a bit more early on in their journey, they can use the policies that we suggest and they can build that into their own baseline. So even if it's not really well defined what they have in place today, they can use us and our community to bulk up their offering so they can deliver more proactive services and a better level of security to their customers.
We're going to take a quick break whilst I quickly introduce MSP Finance Team, the hosts of this podcast. You started your MSP to help business owners master technology. Isn't it time you were rewarded for that? MSP Finance Team helps hard-working MSP owners finally get the profit, time, and control they deserve. With better financial and strategic insight, you can make better decisions, leading to more control, profit, and time. Our approach is unique. We focus exclusively on MSP businesses, and we meld bookkeeping, CFO as a service, accounting, and mentoring to help you get started, scale, or sell. We bring you the freedom to focus on what's important, whether it's growing your business strategically or enjoying spontaneous moments with your family. So visit mspfinanceteam.com today and take the first step towards financial mastery. Because when it comes to your MSP finances, it's not just business, it's a numbers game. I just wanted to circle back to the point you made a couple of minutes ago, Dan, about the struggle with getting the administrative access on the network. And I'm just coming back to this because I'd be interested in our audience's feedback or thoughts on this and what type of approaches they have in general, because I think it is an issue. And one of the things we did is we said, oh, well, you don't have administrative access to your own network. Only your IT firm have this. Well, that's red flag number one. This is your network. You own it. They don't own it. Surely it's like giving your front door key to your neighbor and not having one yourself. Is this really what you want? Or your locksmith, So that was the approach we took on that. And that was kind of the red flag number one approach. So which I think kind of worked, but certainly interested to know of other approaches out there on that one. Jake, just a question, a wider question. It's probably a really obvious answer, but why wouldn't Microsoft look to build this themselves?
I think
or maybe they will.
Yeah, don't tell them.
Don't tell them. Like,
So no, Microsoft do have Lighthouse, which is essentially it's their version of a multi-tenanted management platform within their ecosystem. The reality is it's been around for years and it's been incredibly slow to develop and give MSPs truly what they need. I think, if you look at the space, and it's been the age-old story, Microsoft are leaning on people with dedicated expertise in the MSP space to help them out a little bit, rather than putting that as a real huge focus area within their business. You look at the work they've done with people like ConnectWise, where ConnectWise now have an entire security wraparound service on top of Microsoft technology with their SOC team. And Microsoft really worked very closely with them to drive that forwards. So I think, there's always a place for companies in the MSP space who really understand the innate challenges that come within those companies. If you look at the founders of our business, Rich Thompson owned an MSP and sold it. Rory McClerney, who's our technical director, he really built and thought about the foundations of Inforcer from within the MSP space as well to solve some of his own challenges. And the reality is Microsoft are trying to focus on everyone. So it's that same story of just that focus purely on MSPs. And as they evolve with their services, we'll continue to evolve and give them what they need.
I always liken it to a whale swimming along and there's a load of smaller fish sort of going along with the whale. And over the years, it's always been the case that there's an opportunity. It won't be handed to you on a plate, and maybe it's a little bit awkward to find that opportunity. But yeah, Microsoft can't possibly reach all the places that every MSP can. And so, yeah, it's great to hear that there are products like Inforcer that are supporting and enabling the next generation of MSP. So I think generally the market accepts that security is where we're going. It's been support plus security. I think it was Dan Scott that I first heard say this quote. You used to sell support with security, and now you're going to be selling security with some support, maybe. And so yeah, and this sounds really interesting, because I know a lot of the MSPs I talk to, they are advocates of the business premium offer, but equally don't have enough experience or deploying it. Maybe they have one or two really good clients, but as most MSPs do, tend to normally have sort of a reliance on a few clients where they really get in deep with the technology, and then others that perhaps don't have the budget or the inclination, that mean they don't really get the depth of knowledge in deployment. So great to hear that there's that sort of support environment as well as the tool to help sort of grapple this next generation of MSP.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the reality is, right, if you look at what tools like ours are doing, when we get up to a certain size, Microsoft will probably be very thankful, because we're actually helping. One of their core initiatives as a business is driving people up through the licensing.
Mm-hmm.
And Enforcer is an aggregator and an enabler to help an MSP sell more of the value to their customers as to why they should take that step up in licensing, rather than just saying, here's business premium, it's got more functionality, it's going to cost you X amount per user more. If you can go and use Enforcer to say, well, actually, through going to business premium, we're going to keep you more secure. We're going to have daily insights into anything that's changing. We're going to apply best policy practice on the latest recommendations from Microsoft and NIST2 and CIS and all these frameworks that are dotting around the place in certain geographies. So it gives the MSP much more compelling reasons to take their customers on that journey and ultimately reduce risk, because they're putting more security protocol on each of their customer tenants.
And when you're approaching the MSP market on this, are you approaching, who's your champion here? Is it the sales director or is it the tech director?
A tech director.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Tech director, managing directors or CEOs in smaller MSPs, because they're closer to the problem that, their team is spending time on it. And then in some of the real large, more mature MSPs, they'll have dedicated cloud consultants, they'll have security teams. And again, we can kind of piece into all of those. I spoke to an MSP yesterday, 200 plus employees. They have a projects team, a SOC team, a managed services team, and then a compliance team. And Enforcer can help all four of those teams. So now it's about going and speaking to each of those and really understanding the challenges and the time saves we can give each of those departments.
One thing I mentioned earlier, and it's just, I can't quite get it out of my head, and that's this topic that perhaps the MSP's clients already assumes that this is happening. Like, we manage your 365, we look after your 365 tenant. Well, I assume you do everything then, right? And of course, the client won't necessarily have the knowledge to challenge the MSP to say, well, when you say manage our tenant, what exactly are you doing? So is there a playbook to help the MSP educate their client? And again, from a new business perspective, even more so, like, here's some questions to ask your MSP. How do you apply best practice policies to our tenants? And how do you know if a user is taken out of MFA, for example, like to create that tension in the relationship and perhaps to bring the doubt in and say, oh, well, actually, yeah, if they're not doing that for us, what else aren't they doing? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, so we work closely with all of our existing customers on helping them drive new business. So ultimately, we enable them to ask, exactly like you said, certain questions and use things like the tenant audit report to educate that end client on the innate challenge that their current MSP might have with managing their Microsoft tenant. And that leads to gaps in X, Y, and Z area, which is why we, as the new prospective MSP, leverage tools to help us manage that in a more efficient way to ensure that there aren't any gaps. For existing customers, it's always the same challenge, right? It's like MSPs who have to go back and sell the latest endpoint security solution when they've had the antivirus in place for 5 years. It's a really difficult conversation, and I'm not gonna be one of those people that's gonna say anything otherwise, because there's plenty of people that kind of talk as if it's such an easy task, but it's definitely not. So for those ones, it's really about to educate the existing client base. I think the ones who are doing it well are aligning two frameworks. So they are talking about how we can now deliver a proactive service based on the CIS benchmarks and what they suggest, which is basically a governing body that touches loads of different components of other things like cyber essentials and HIPAA compliance in the US. So those MSPs are having a lot of success where they're taking their customers through a never-ending journey of cybersecurity, through things like compliance or through things like tenant hardening as a service, secure score as a service. Those are the ones that are having a lot of success. And if their end customers are pushing back on, well, aren't you doing this already? The kind of position back is absolutely, we're doing as much as we can to secure your Microsoft tenant. The challenge we have is it is a beast. And we are now looking at solutions to better secure your tenant as the landscape is changing. And these are the things that we can now offer you on top of the services we did for you before. But yeah, not an easy one at all.
No. And of course, the Microsoft 365 that you initially subscribed to a decade ago is very different to the one that we now have. And in fact, it's not even called that. It was called, you bought Office 365 and now it's Microsoft 365. So not only the name has changed, but lots of bits in the background. And yes, different marketplace. And I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Client, but in a year's time, I'm probably going to come back to you and say there's now something else that we've got to talk about. But the good news is the problem we had last year is now much more commoditized and efficient. And so, you know, there will be this constant. One of the things I've said, a good reason to be in this industry is we constantly invent new problems to solve. So, you know, there is endless opportunity, but there's endless risk. So, you know, you have to accept that and be proactive and setting the right level of expectation with your client. At minimum, though, having that conversation and saying there is this new level of tenant management, tenant hardening, secure score as a service, etc. There is this new level that we need to take you to. However, if you don't want to go on that journey, then we're now setting this as an exclusion. So we cannot be under any illusion that we are doing these things for you. We're saying that we're not, and we advise that we do. And this is the additional price for doing that.
And that exclusion is documented on their roadmap planning. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's just like the war in Ukraine. You know how sort of technology's going crazy on that battlefield. And I only just read the other day about the fact that now they've got these tiny little drones which cost like 300 quid each or something like that. They strap some explosive to it and it can take a helicopter down. So now you've got the cost, crazy different commercials going on where instead of spending 30 million or 3 million or something on a huge drone, they've got 300 quid ones and they can take a helicopter down. So they're not quite up there ready for jets, but apparently, yeah, with all this remote control technology, they can just go smash themselves into a helicopter and bring it down. So, and that's happening right now in Ukraine. And, you know, all these things accelerate the speed, don't they, of innovation. And that's what's happening in IT with security all the time. And I think there's just some really good metaphors there for you can use with your clients about the rate of change and where do you want to be? You know, do you want to be left behind or do you want to be still in business in 3 years?
Yeah, I think I think that's storytelling is really powerful. And I think, you know, for any MSP that is driving new business, it's setting those expectations from day one. Like you said, Daniel, it's don't be annoyed when I keep coming back to you with new suggestions, because guess what? The threat actors every day are looking at new ways to exploit.
And actually, that's what
so
you're
you have to
paying us
keep up.
for as well.
Yeah.
You're paying us to come back to you to say you need to spend more money.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's a managed service. And if that managed service has to be tweaked and move and be agile to deal with the landscape, then so be it. I think another story MSPs can say is, if we were sat here 5, 6 years ago, what would we have said about things like electric cars? And I saw an Instagram video of someone yesterday in a self-driving car sat in the back in LA. We would have never thought that. So it's the same thing. But yeah, storytelling is really powerful.
Really good. And we've covered a huge amount of ground, and I really appreciate your time. The quick fire round, I thought you dealt with very well. We'd normally at this point in an episode hand over for a shameless plug. But again, I think there's lots of great points that you've made about Inforcer and what you're doing. If anyone wants to carry on the conversation, how best do they get hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So reach out to me on LinkedIn, Jake Webber-Cadby, or if people are interested in seeing the platform, you can book in directly on our website, Inforcer.com. So yeah, that's nice and simple. And another great thing is we were doing some event planning this morning. I think we've got about 17 events that we're going to be attending between now and the end of the year. So I'm sure people can meet us in person at places like IT Nation in Orlando. We're at DataCon in Miami. We're going to be at all the Huntress road shows across the country. We're going to be at PAX 8 in Berlin. So lots of places that people can get to know us in person and really see what we're about.
Super. Well, I'm sure we'll meet you out and about on our travels as we're about to get into event season yet again. And I really appreciate your time, and thanks ever so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks, Kate.
Thanks so much, guys. Take care.